Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is titled eCOA Data and Regulatory Scrutiny, What You Should Know. My name is Nima and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box. And we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. At this point, I'd like to thank Y-Prime, who helped to develop the content for this presentation. Y-Prime offers more than a decade of focused work with eClinical systems to expedite and improve the quality of patient management, clinical supplies, drug accountability, and clinical data. Cloud-based interactive response technology and electronic clinical outcome assessment platforms offer sponsors greater speed, precision, and integration in clinical trial management. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Steve Begley serves as Senior Vice President of Quality and Compliance and Chief Privacy Officer for Y-Prime. As a seasoned quality assurance executive, he oversees the company's global quality function, including quality control and assurance, regulatory compliance, process improvement, software development and delivery, and quality management systems. As Vice President of Strategic Solutions, Colin Cleary focuses on development of global customer relationships and business development activity to identify ways that Y-Prime can serve its biopharmaceutical clients. Colin is a recognized subject matter expert in eCOA technology, bringing more than 10 years of operational and strategic business experience. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to our first speaker. Steve, you can begin the presentation whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Today we're going to cover the eCOA data and regulatory scrutiny, and we're going to cover some general topics in our agenda first. We're going to cover some regulatory perspectives and drivers. We'll then move on and discuss some components of audit trails, where we'll cover some examples of these as well. And then I'll hand the controls over to my colleague Colin, who will cover some considerations for sponsors and providers, followed by a Q&A session afterwards. But before we get started with the presentation, we'd like to start off by presenting a poll question.
All right, everyone, our first poll question has been launched on your screens, and we have 4 options here for you to select from. I encourage all audience members to vote in real time on this poll question, and we'll take a look at the results. So this poll question is, what areas of eSource regulatory compliance pose the greatest challenges for your organization? Our 4 options here are record keeping of eSource documentation, user roles, access and permission, data review, or audit trial management. So once again, our 4 options here are record keeping of eSource documentation, user roles, access and permission, data review, or audit trial management. All right, it looks like most of the audience members have voted. Let's take a look at the results. All right, perfect. So 32% of audience members have selected the first option, record keeping of eSource documentation. 24% of audience members have selected user roles, access and permission. 24% of audience members have selected data review, and 20% of audience members have selected audit trial management. Now back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Nima. So, regulators' perspective. Today, regulators depend on the ability to verify the quality and integrity of data collected in support of their clinical trials. Doing so allows inspectors to determine the authenticity and acceptability of the data submitted. Due to the ever-changing landscape of clinical trial technologies, new trends and concerns continuously surface, leading to adaptation in inspection techniques, which can differ from inspector to inspector. And this is largely due to technology evolving much quicker than regulation. In addition, as new technology platforms enter the space, they are welcomed by the industry. However, regulators still do hold fast to the onus lying with sponsors to document how these systems will be used while remaining compliant with the existing regulations. So here you can see that several guidance documents are listed and they're available for review, with the most recent being from the MHRA, which was issued in March of this year, 2018. And items of significance that are covered and warrant a closer look are data criticality classification for both paper-generated data and electronic, the right environment to ensure data integrity, proper data review, and approval of both paper and electronic records. So I'd encourage you to spend some time reviewing these guidance documents to gain some greater insight regarding your approaches to data integrity. So some case examples. Some examples to note regarding ePro data integrity are derived from MHRA GCP metrics report from 2016. So within the ePro data integrity was the source of three critical findings. A major theme was related to many of the data changes that didn't have proper supporting evidence. And as a result, the agency urged sponsors to develop proactive processes to review data on a more regimented basis to ensure validity and accuracy of DCFs prior to the trial's ending. FDA inspectors have also revealed during industry conferences, most recently observed at the 2018 SQA conference last month, that clinical trial data being captured electronically is being examined much more thoroughly due to the many technologies permeating the market. They've mentioned one of their chief concerns is data security, given the plethora of data breaches being reported regularly lately. This is also a significant topic given the recently effective GDPR law. However, this is a topic for future discussion. The FDA inspector's advice is consistent with other agencies. Sponsors are responsible and should take necessary precautions to ensure that the security and integrity of their data collected in support of their protocols. And this should always be done in concert with your IT groups and vendors alike, as this is a joint responsibility and success is dependent upon successful collaboration and cooperation with all groups involved. So regulators are beginning to pay special attention to ensuring long-standing expectations are being adequately met with respect to data integrity. And eCOA standards are a must, meaning the data has to be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, or certified copied, and accurate. Audit trails have to be accurate and complete, which means metadata also needs to be included with that data produced within the audit trail, such that the audit trail data has meaning, and the story of that data can be reconstructed as needed. Human readable forms of audit trails are also a prime focus, as these are necessary to facilitate periodic review of the data and all potential changes to the data. There's also a greater focus on documentation of processes employed to ensure data integrity, which includes the review of data changes and the corresponding justification that highlights authorization to make all of these recorded updates. Identity management and user access controls are also high on regulators' priority lists. With respect to user access, they're evaluating role-based access enforcement to ensure users only have access to what they need access to at any given point in time. This includes when users' roles change during the conduct of a trial. It's imperative to confirm upon a change in a user's role, access is appropriately updated to reflect that change in responsibility. In addition, there has to be segregation of duties such that no one individual or role has authorization to create or modify or delete data with no verification or approval step to manage such data changes. User access tracking is also an area of focus, as the expectation is at any time during the conduct of the trial, anyone should be able to track a user's activity within these applications, thus being able to ensure users are using the system as intended with access appropriate for their existing roles. So just to go a little bit deeper into the considerations of effective audit trails, we'll cover some general objectives of audit trails, the human readable formats to consider, and what works for your organization, and then the content structure of the data within and the review cycle considerations. So you'll really want to ensure that all content for submission is easily traced back to your source data. And this includes any data changes which may have occurred along the way. There should be a way to reconstruct that data via the capture of all activities described when the data or changes were captured, by whom, and the reason for those changes. There needs to also be supporting evidence which demonstrates all data changes made were authorized. In addition, you'll want to use these audit trails to catch data and access errors early on before the cascading effect occurs, which could lead to this issue permeating into other systems such as EDC, specifically for eCOA. So the human readable formats. Typically, the complete audit trail is part of the system archive upon removing these systems from production environments. However, they're not usually easy to read, and all data and metadata are lumped together into what's effectively a data dump that's nearly impossible to review with no meaningful structure. And putting this data into more of a chronological order within a report, perhaps, could be viewed within the system or easily exported for review by an authorized individual. That's the clear target to aim for. So the audit trail structure. The construct of the audit trail should contain the following components to effectively recreate the chain of events within your eCOA systems or other clinical systems. The event or action completed should be identified easily. The username or ID of the individual responsible for the action, and the date and time stamp needs to be included, of which there are different views of how dates and times should be captured. However, just to note, this is less important than ensuring that however these are captured, it's consistent throughout your data systems and potential vendors. And it needs to also show previous entry if the data has been altered along with the current value, and then any reason for changes that have occurred throughout the system's use. So review cycles. When determining your specific process of audit trail review frequency, it should be based upon the criticality of the data you're capturing, with the most critical being reviewed most frequently and the least critical being reviewed least. Again, always taking into consideration the review cycle times achievable and most appropriate for your specific organization. The controller of the data is responsible for reviews, though these reviews can be delegated or outsourced to a CRO or another vendor, in which case there should be a clear process for supervision of these critical activities. Typically, reviews should ideally be conducted within the system itself or from a validated report or export that you'd work with your IT group or vendor to create. And this ensures that you'll be able to get what you need and you'll have your documented process to support the reviews of audit trails moving forward. Finally, you'll want to ensure these actions are properly documented so that you'll receive credit for having completed them. And this will also provide a mechanism for process improvement as you move forward and you strengthen all of your processes regarding data integrity. And here we've put together an example audit trail report. And what yours looks like for the different data types you collect may differ from one to the next. But the specific format is just in capturing or encapsulating everything that might work in a specific instance that we decided to pull. So at this point, I'm going to pass control back to Nima for the polling question.
All right, everybody. So we have our second polling question here on your screen, and I encourage all audience members to vote on this question in real time. So we have 4 options here to select from, and our question here is, based on the information that Steve presented, how inspection ready is your organization today? Now we have 4 options here. We are very prepared. We are mostly prepared with a few gaps to fill. We have a plan, but are in the early stages of implementation, or we have some work to do. So once again, I encourage all audience members to vote on this question in real time, and we'll take a look at the results. So we have 4 options here. We are very prepared. We are mostly prepared with a few gaps to fill. We have a plan, but are in the early stages of implementation, or we have some work to do. All right, so it looks like most audience members have voted. Let's take a look at the results. Okay, so 13% of audience members have selected, we are very prepared. 44% of audience members, the majority, have selected, we are mostly prepared, but with a few gaps to fill. Now, 25% of audience members have selected the third option, which is we have a plan, but are in the early stages of implementation. And 19% of audience members have selected we have some work to do. Such interesting results. Now I would like to hand control over to our second speaker, Colin Cleary. Colin, you can begin the presentation whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you, Nima. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful, great, thanks so much. So to begin, the intention of this section of the session is to share considerations about what sponsors and service providers can do as it relates to the observations that were just shared by my colleague, Steve. I'm aiming to offer advice related to what some sponsors are doing and to pose some questions for you to take away from this discussion. Sponsor and vendor partnerships are critical to ensuring readiness for regulatory inspection. While this may be an obligation for sponsors, it's also an opportunity for service providers. Service providers need to ensure that processes are appropriately defined that detail user access rights and acceptable types of data changes. It's important to recognize that even if the service provider wants to support this effort, it may be difficult if the relationship with the sponsor is transactional. In other words, commitment from both sides will ensure that both the sponsor and provider are collaborating to ensure inspection readiness. Creation of a data integrity plan that governs how data will be reviewed and a commitment to its oversight offers 2 things: a clear process that may be shared with an inspector and an internal plan that may be applied to all studies. This plan may be used to demonstrate attentiveness to your data review, providing opportunities to define any anomalies or funny business before a larger problem arises or it is too late. I think that it's safe to say that we all have concerns related to data integrity and a desire to minimize any issues. While this may be true, it is likely that very few organizations have defined a specific plan for how they will oversee data integrity in the trials that they're running. We recommend that sponsors begin to manage this process moving forward by documenting a plan that's specific to your organization and how your trials operate. Furthermore, each protocol should be considered, and this plan should be adapted to account for study-specific nuances. By formally documenting a plan, you'll be able to hold team members accountable for overseeing areas of concern, and you'll also be able to present this plan for inspection at any time. Data management team members and statistical programmers can assist by creating algorithms that may be run against the received data to highlight any potential areas that may require a deeper review. Complementing these algorithms, you can create use cases that reference specific scenarios and the steps that will be taken to demonstrate that appropriate data review has occurred. Within your data integrity plan, it's important to consider your audit trail. When you think of an audit trail in eCOA, you're likely thinking of 2 things. Is an audit trail present in the database when a data change has been raised? And is this audit trail included in the archive at the end of the study? You're probably not thinking about how this information may be reviewed or interpreted by the end user. Rather, you're concerning yourself with a simple yes or no question. Can I say that my archive has an audit trail of each data point? I'd be willing to go one step further and say that we're probably not thinking about using this audit trail for analysis during the life of the study. Even if you have thought about this, have you considered how in practice you actually would interpret this information to demonstrate a level of proactivity? If you were to look at these audit trails, are they actually in a form that you can use and review easily? A sponsor I talked with indicated that their inspector asked for this information in Word or Excel format, a far different format than the way that this content was currently presented. I'm willing to bet that across vendors, you can feel assured that they're maintaining audit trails within their technology. Fortunately, this isn't the gap. The question is, knowing what we know now, can we tweak this functionality to be looked at earlier and so that it can be consumed more easily? Can you confirm when data was saved, sent, and received on the server? When you have provisioned devices in your trial, what is being done to manage the inventory? Have all devices been returned at study conclusion? And can you link the data that's been collected to a specific device? Can you summarize devices that may have been shipped but that were not used? Was there a problem with the device that prevented it from being used, or was the device simply not needed at the site? How well can you track data sending? Can you ensure that all expected data has been sent to the database? As you're considering exploring audit trails more closely during the life of the trial, you should bear in mind that your vendor may not be set up to accommodate this fully at the start. Discuss your intentions with your service providers and evaluate what they can do today to review these audit trails. Determine what you can review during the course of the study and how this information might be presented following its conclusion. Encourage innovation of your vendor's products to create tools that better manage these systems. Recognize that some custom programming may be needed in the interim to facilitate this in the short term. Once you've clearly defined the data that you wish to review, functionality can be built to assist in your review of study data integrity. With so many trials and so many users and so many systems, do we have tools set up that demonstrate that we are monitoring user access in a timely fashion? How confident are you that users that access the portals you use in your trials are up to date? Are there any proactive measures that you've put in place to monitor these accounts for compliance? Are you looking at role-based assignment carefully? When it comes to user access, the management of new accounts is likely overseen more closely than the disabling of accounts for study staff that has turned over. What is being done to ensure that accounts are disabled or revoked in a timely manner? As you think about managing user access more closely, recognize that the responsibility for managing this can be shared by both the vendor and the sponsor or CRO. As a vendor, you can work with your sponsors to define parameters to flag users for non-use and inactivity. This can begin by configuring a report that presents each user, their role, date and time of last login, as well as the number of logins. If possible, the vendor can take this even a step further to display what the user is doing when they are logged into the system. This could perhaps show how many clicks they've made during each session, or what pages or reports they've reviewed during a single session. The intention here is to demonstrate that you're being attentive to staff and ensuring that they are reviewing the data as you would expect. As a sponsor, you can also work with the vendor to automate the review of this data more easily. You can have the vendor create an algorithm that looks at each user and will alert you to users that have not used the system for a predefined amount of time. This parameter itself may be tailored on a study-specific basis, defined by the complexity of the trial and the amount of time that you would want to expect your sites and monitors to use the web portal. The output of this can be shared with relevant study team members to notify them of users that are idle. Based on their role, you can define which accounts should remain active and those that should be disabled. As a sponsor or CRO, you'll want to ensure that you've built in monitoring user access as part of your regular activity. Plan to use tools built by the vendor on a regular basis, such as monthly, so that you can demonstrate accountability to this task. Consider alternative mechanisms to review user access. Perhaps, if you work at a larger sponsor running multiple studies, you can work with human resources to identify turnover or reassignment of study team members. Plan and document a systematic approach for this oversight so that upon inspection, you may share your plan. Documenting this process will demonstrate the oversight that you have over user access. Lastly, we should consider the data management aspect. Are we looking at behaviors and patterns in the data and the metadata collected? Or are we just scratching the surface and looking at simpler data checks? Again, documenting your plan for data review in a way that can be shared with any inspector has been successful for sponsors. Their ability to clearly present what they're doing to observe data, particularly how they're tracking anomalies within the data, has received positive feedback during inspection. Look for trends within the data changes that are being requested. Are there patients or sites that have a particularly large volume of data changes? Can you confirm that the changes being requested are in line with the types that are acceptable in the study? Can you demonstrate that you're taking missing data into account and understanding why gaps within the data itself may exist? Conversationally, it appears that most sponsors are starting to think about data integrity as it pertains to data management, but they've made little progress in how they plan to demonstrate their attentiveness to these changes. Some sponsors have committed to managing oversight of this data and as a result have documented their behaviors formally. A sponsor with whom I spoke created what they referred to as a data integrity playbook. This defined their practices for data oversight and what they plan to do across studies. This documentation should be specific to your organization and how you can best manage this data. The need to demonstrate attentiveness to this level of oversight is beneficial as it's not a requirement that's going to go away. Within the documentation, define case studies for data changes, compliance, and help desk log review. The objective here is to define and prove that you've maintained oversight of the data that's being collected and have made all attempts to minimize any anomalies. Compliance is a value that should be followed and attended to by all involved parties, the sponsor, the vendor, and the CRO. With eCOA and data connectivity becoming easier, we're better able to assess the common challenge of compliance. Historically, email alerts have been used to notify site staff and monitors to potential issues with compliance. These alerts, however, are only valuable if action is taken based on the actual alert itself. One option to consider is to utilize your vendor for monitoring of specific data points regularly. The monitor will review the data to identify any predefined issues, concerns, or values that were reported, and will communicate with the site directly to alert them to this issue. This support structure can highlight specific responses and lead to corrective measures that will remedy or address the issue before it becomes something larger. Lastly, while eCOA ideally limits the volume of data queries and changes, it does not wholly eliminate them as a possibility. If data is not reviewed in a timely fashion, it's possible that many changes may be requested at a single point in time. This may lead to a backlog of changes that need to be processed once approved, and could lead to frustration when trying to ensure the cleanliness of the data as you approach an interim analysis or a database lock date. As these changes are implemented by personnel that work at the vendor, this can lead to a delay in processing and the potential that a change may be implemented incorrectly and will need to be re-implemented. At Y', we are attempting to eliminate the human component and the delay in processing these changes. DCF processing has been automated to occur immediately and programmatically after all the appropriate approvals have been obtained. This system accounts for all data change types. Simple changes like a visit identifier, or complex changes like composite scores that are calculated based on patient data, clinician evaluations, and laboratory values. Removal of the vendor from the critical path for the implementation of these changes greatly improves this workflow and ensures the accuracy of the data change implementation itself. So as we conclude this discussion, I thought it would be worth leaving you with some final thoughts from the sponsors with whom I spoke. The sponsor is ultimately accountable for the management and oversight of the integrity of the data. The sponsor should collaborate with their vendors to guarantee that they have the tools that will make the review easy and comprehensive. The areas of review will be sponsor-specific. You'll need to develop a way to monitor clinical data, and more importantly, the data about the data itself. Some advice to sponsors. If you've not started to think about what you need to do to prove oversight and control of integrity of data and the minimization of any funny business, then you can start by establishing requirements about what you would like to oversee. Concurrently, you should clue in your vendor staff so they're not building requirements in a vacuum. Too often, when this occurs, the sponsor conceives a requirement that don't align with the capabilities of the vendor. Don't start this process by conceiving a solution that's like a Ferrari when your vendor may only be able to build a Toyota. Begin working with what the vendor can provide today and work to develop those systems for more advanced purposes in the future. And some advice for vendors. You need to start thinking about technology differently. Recognize that there's a lot of data that's being collected already that may not be readily consumable by your sponsor partners. Think about how you can transfer this information based on what sponsor collaborators are likely going to ask for. Advancement of sharing audit trail information that is in both human readable, can the inspector interpret this information easily, and machine readable, can I use this audit trail so that I can run algorithms from that data set in easy-to-use file formats like XML or CSV? Are you actively looking and sharing information about the hardware, the terminal IDs, and terminal logs to demonstrate the integrity of the data that has been collected? Recognize that the sponsor needs to prove that everyone is running their business and ensuring the quality of the data that's being collected. And at this point, I would like to turn the conversation back to Nima for a Q&A session.
Well, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Now I would like to invite our audience members to continue sending in their questions or comments using the control panel, the questions option in the control panel. I've already received a few questions, so let's start with those. Okay, so we have a question here for Steve, and this question is, in your experience, what is the leading cause for inspection findings that involve eSource?
In my experience, I think access controls being inadequate and administrator accounts being too widespread with too many roles having administrator access and ineffective oversight to ensure that those changes being made by authorized users and credentials being shared across users, resulting in that inability to trace actions back to the individual users. And I think collectively that's really what I've seen out there most.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question here is, how have requests for audit trail reporting changed since regulators have made their concerns about eSource public?
Now that's an interesting question. Surprisingly, I haven't seen a ton in terms of additional requests for audit trail reporting. However, I think the discussion topic has been significantly more prevalent, and that's across the industry in multiple areas. It'll be great to see more requests for sponsors to kind of work with their IT groups and or vendors to create reports, such as what Colin just talked about a short moment ago. For such, and then to share lessons learned among industry peers to eventually come up with and develop a standard across the industry so that we can all work towards facilitating that better control of data integrity across systems and vendors.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. We have a question here for you, Steve, and this question is, we are aware of ePRO systems that do not require subjects to log in, but instead they just receive an email link. We do not think this is 21 CRF Part 11 compliant. What do you think?
I personally think that Part 11 is pretty clear about there needs to be 2 unique identifiers. So if there's only a single identifier or link, then there's nothing that allows you to really present that data at a later point and confirm that user is who they say they are. For instance, if someone else were to have access to that individual's email on purpose or by accident, if they were to click the link, they would be privy to whatever that content is and could respond, and there would be no way to really trace that back to a specific individual. So I would say that I don't believe that should really be considered a Part 11 compliant manner to really institute how those work.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question here is, you mentioned data changes within audit trials are problematic. How do you handle site-level data change requests if there is no supporting documentation?
Well, I think while the site does own that data, I do believe there has to be, or there is some reason for us to, as vendors, continue that requirement of we have to capture the objective evidence that's required to show that not only we made the change, but that we made the change in an authorized fashion, meaning we have documentation from whomever that authorized user is to make the change on their behalf. And of course, you'd want to then document all of those changes accordingly in a ticket or however that is captured at your organization or vendor, so that you can be certain if that data is called into question during inspection, you can support those actions taken.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. We have another question here. This one's for Colin. How does your DCF solution automate complex data changes?
Sure. So during the configuration and setup process of a study, we are taking into account and identifying what types of changes are going to be acceptable. And so identification of what changes are acceptable in a given study helps us to anticipate the types of changes that are going to be needed. So just as with the actual development of the system itself and the data collection tool, we are customizing and building the instant DCF function to handle and accommodate for these composite scores, ensuring that when a change is made, all subscores as well as final outcome and value of the changes are working as you would expect if our system was calculating that value itself.
All right, thank you very much for those answers. We've reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If your question wasn't attended to during the Q&A session, the team from Y Prime will do their best to follow up with you after the webinar. You can also reach out to our speakers by using the email addresses displayed on your screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive of this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers by sending a quick message through the chat panel. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.